is because I agree with you.
Okay.
Maybe it sounds crazy. I say, don't stop trying to change Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't scale. But I think I believe more strongly than some of the people that want those soft forks in the idea of getting as many people to use the Bitcoin blockchain as possible. My standards are coming from a different perspective. It's simply that I think that what they're doing is actually a waste of time, that they're actually taking huge risks without actually knowing anything about what the outcomes could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think there's another level of performance that we're denying ourselves by being distracted with this bullshit.
Welcome to the Joe Nakamoto show, hosted in a crypto playground.
Happy to be here.
Great. I might have to explain the crypto playground thing later, but the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you rate your skills at spoon jousting?
Spoon jousting. Oh, well, despite being a novice, I think that I will achieve my yellow belt quite soon.
There are belts to this thing.
Seriously?
Spoon, orange.
No, that was unexpectedly fun. Yeah, thanks for that.
Nice. Yeah, did you enjoy the Plan B quiz overall? This was Lugano's. No, was it Lugano's edition? Yeah, Lugano's edition.
Yeah. I've been saying for a while that there should be more head-to-head things. And I like how Lugano finally did. They did like a semi-formal debate. Okay. I wasn't in one of those, but they did one or two of those with about what was it about?
There was one with
fixing the filters probably was one of them.
Yes, there was one with Rizzo and someone else against Luke Dash.
Yeah.
I used to call him Luke Dash Jr. until you corrected me. Thanks for asking.
I think we might both be wrong. I don't know.
Oh, really? He is Dash Jr. Okay.
I've never heard him say it, so I don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't say much generally, though. But for El Salvador, you coming to that one in January?
Yeah.
The Plan B one. So we could pitch more head-to-head stuff. What should we pitch as head-to-head?
Oh, I don't know, man. I certainly would be excited to do a debate as long as it was with somebody that I thought would be genuine in the debate. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting format, as well as the other head-to-heads. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that is one of the big challenges, right? Finding someone who's genuine about debating and genuine about the subject matter.
Well, that's why debate has so many rules and fallacies, and there are all these things that you're supposed to memorize. I don't have them all memorized in any formal way, but you kind of pick them up over the years when you are arguing a lot with people.
Yeah. Which is what you do, right? Online. I mean, I wanted to ask about that.
On and off, but yeah.
On and off. I mean, why is your Twitter handle Bitcoin error log? Because I mean, that's one of the first things I thought was interesting about, when you come into the Bitcoin space, you see all of these sort of famous people, and then you see the famous people arguing with other famous people, and your name often comes up, but it's always Bitcoin error log. And I was wondering what inspired you to take that Twitter handle in the first place?
So as far as why I chose the name, I think that it's probably self-evident in that I like telling people what's wrong and what they have wrong. I'm a critical and judgmental person. I'm not really this in an insulting or emotional way, at least not intentionally, despite that these things are always uncomfortable. But yeah, it was just the idea that very early on in participating in the community, I felt inclined to correct people on things that they had as misconceptions or this kind of thing. And it's only become much more that way over the years as far as how I use Twitter and for Bitcoin, at least. So yeah, I think the name was very appropriate and it stuck. And also in the first years of Bitcoin, I only used that name. So I was a pseudonym first. And then I started, I came out, or whatever the term would be, doxed myself. I don't know. And I did that. I don't remember how many years ago, but I was very hesitant to do that. But yeah. Also, another reason that it's funny is that Bitcoin actually doesn't have an error log, which is a nice trivia for you.
Oh, there you go. I knew there was something like John Carvalho-esque about it.
I was told this later. I haven't verified that either, but that's true.
Okay, fair. And why did you take the decision to come out the closet and dox yourself?
That's probably not the correct term. Well, it was actually the second handle that I had used in Bitcoin. I had thrown away my first one after a while, and I had my inclination was to throw away the handles once I became too well known. But I mean, back then we were still paranoid that being in Bitcoin was going to be like putting you on a list.
It is though, right? Is it not?
I mean, there's so many of us, it's a pretty big list, but I guess everybody's on a list these days.
Yeah.
But back then it was just a little bit more paranoia. And so, and I was much more shy. I never really liked being on camera or on stage or anything like that. I only came to do those things because of how passionate I am about Bitcoin and the ideas I have about it, not because I actually like being on stage or or even publicly arguing. It's just that, it's like somebody's wrong on the internet guy is more likely. I'm ranting now anyway.
No, this is the space to run. This is also, this is one of the first sort of proper podcast episodes I'm doing. And I mean, I was telling you on offline before starting this that, there's a big void in the Bitcoin podcasting space. And if you were to cover my arms in tattoos, and if I was to talk about football a little bit more, then maybe I could be like a poor man's Peter McCormack.
Well, I mean, I don't know what a poor man's Peter McCormack is, and he's kind of an everyman.
Yeah, like,
no, I'm sure he's rich at this point, but he's got an everyman attitude, and I think that works for him. Yeah, but I do think you're right. Like you said earlier, Americans do like British accents, so that could work for you.
It's bizarre, right? It's a bit of Stockholm syndrome about it as well.
I think it's how we are introduced to British people through movies, and so it's almost always through the stereotype of like Downton Abbey kind of thing. Okay. So it's always this aristocratic, old, it's like that grandfatherly kind of thing. And so we have this subconscious connection with, royalty with the British accent.
Okay. I mean, I've been going through the old Christopher Nolan films recently, like going from start to finish. You know how Michael Caine isn't like in pretty much all of them, but he's not aristocratic at all. He's, Cockney geezer. Michael Caine, you're only supposed to blood it up.
Oh, Americans are bad at this. Like we can tell accents of Americans. We have some ability, right. But as far as being able to discern whether like this is like I don't even know the terms for different areas of British accents, but most Americans couldn't tell Irish apart from British. Never mind, like the different dialects.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And Scottish as well. These are I can tell them apart, but I'm more traveled than a lot of Americans, and I like trying to tell these things apart. But
when did you leave the US?
When did I leave the US permanently or semi-permanently was 2017. Yeah, 2016. Basically, I went through a divorce in 2016, and I ended up just traveling, like basically homeless for a while, for like 3 months, and going to Bitcoin
market stuff.
Yeah, and then I ended up going. I had a business partner in Romania, and so I went there, and then I just since then never really left Europe, and I ended up getting my Portuguese citizenship because my father is Portuguese. So I have dual citizenship.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because Carvalho is of course a Portuguese name. Mm-hmm. What does it mean in English? Is it like
It's oak tree.
Oak tree.
Oak, yeah.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay, and so you're settled here, do you think?
For now.
Yeah.
I could see myself moving again, but I've moved a lot in my life, and I'd like to reduce the frequency at least.
And I feel that pain very much so at the moment. But I'm also increasingly settled here. I don't think there's anywhere else in Europe where you can have a similar quality of life. But I'm also aware that the whole European decline thing is definitely sort of trickling into Portugal to an extent.
Yeah, I'm hoping Portugal just kind of like cruises its way through and doesn't really get too involved in any of this stuff, and I won't have to worry about it,
Yeah.
But I could see how it could go wrong. I could see how we could, Portugal could become extremely, communist, or this modern version socialist. These kinds of things. But I stay out of it, and I'm happy so far.
I mean, I see hammer and sickles when I
have seen some posts, some propaganda posters and such. It's pretty weird. I don't know. There's part of me thinks like it's probably not that much different here than in the U.S., where it's like these are just a loud minority of crazy people, and we don't want it to get so bad that they end up becoming running the country. But if we don't acknowledge, if we just act like adults, everything will be okay.
Yeah, it is a big ask, though, isn't it? It's a big ask. I mean, when I first moved here, I used to attend the local sort of community centre. It was full of old people that were speaking very slowly in Portuguese. And I thought, this is brilliant to practice. And it's literally like round the corner from the first flat I lived in. And I soon realised that it was like the communist meetup for the fishermen where I lived. And they're all just espousing these values of, we need to share our resources and pool them and this kind of stuff. And then I was like,
I mean, I have no issue with people, cooperating. Cooperate however you like. Like, it's fine. Just leave me out of it. Just don't impose what your ideas on me.
Yeah. But it's one of those funny things where once you see it, and you see it a lot more across Portugal, and it's bizarre because I think Portugal's just too far from Ukraine and Russia and the sort of the Iron Curtain, and it's also too far from Cuba. And so it's sort of this little isolated pocket where the fall of communism and the fact that communist and hardcore left socialist values just don't work. People never really saw that or experienced it, and it doesn't sort of run in there. How
you think it's a factor of distance, though.
Yeah, Yeah, and like blood and like, you know how in Poland, you know, socialist values are just not going to work ever because Poland's like now very, very capitalist, and you know it's one of the more freedom-loving.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, this is going in a different direction and definitely not something I'm expert in, but like, I don't know how to articulate this, but there's a certain probably comfort that some people in Eastern Europe would have with some, communist ideas.
So it's a romanticization of the
Not romanticization, but just in other words, like, yeah, everybody can say a lot of bad things about what happened, and but it's also like, I lived in Romania for a while, and I feel like the culture is still affected by communism. Like, now it's negatively affected, in my opinion. But in other words, can a culture that is still feeling, the effects of that trauma, effectively avoid that trauma again? I think is a good question.
It's like
yes, they will preach to you on the internet about, oh, you're crazy if you think this is a good idea, but those are the people of the internet. What about the full populace of those countries? I don't know. I think it's crazy for like Portuguese people to think they know what's going on in like Ukrainians' heads, or it's just so far removed. Maybe you're right, in whether it be distance or just experience, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is definitely like the direction I thought we'd go.
I'll make a segue to Bitcoin, which is probably in your list somewhere. I said that, I have no issue with people cooperating and doing things, and this is a topic of consensus, right?
Yeah.
And so I believe in this concept of, I don't know if it's a real term, but I call it mutual consensus. It's probably just redundant. It just means consensus. But when you think of it as it being something that's mutual, you can think of it as there are consensus things that may overlap and may not overlap.
Okay.
So in other words, there are things that we agree on and things that we don't. And so how do we connect on things that we agree on and separate on things that we don't? And that would be some of the philosophy of what I'm going to do with the things that we're doing with PubKey, but also related to recent topics about, talking in Bitcoin, a lot of people wanting soft forks. And I've been trying to represent Bitcoin in a very ultra conservative way, because I feel like there aren't really many people doing this, and it's pretty reasonable and realistic to behave this way. But I think a lot of people think I'm acting crazy. But it all comes down to that. I actually don't think there's any way to soft fork or hard fork Bitcoin in a non-oppressive way. In other words, it requires a centralized governance process to oppress a portion of people that have either no awareness of what's happening or no true ability to stop what's happening if they disagree with it. And so if we believe in speculatively changing Bitcoin, we believe in governance for Bitcoin. And that's my issue with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, non-oppressive was the word that jumped out at me there. There's no way to soft fork or hard fork Bitcoin without it being,
Yeah, you have to force it on people.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that is kind of why I wanted to speak to you today, because, you have been loudly, explaining that we shouldn't be making these changes. And I mean, I did have some tweets printed out, but maybe I can just show them in the show notes as well. Do I have any right there? No, I don't. And we'll come to...
I don't want to ruin your sequence here, but I was trying to get us out of this political rut.
Yeah, no, of course. This is not a sequence. This is just to help out and to remind myself. Also because I've had an incredibly long and arduous week, and I just needed this to help myself out. But the one thing that you wrote recently, which I quite liked, was, and it's relating to this mutual consensus thing, is Bitcoin consensus isn't built, it is enforced. And what do you mean by that? And also, like, can you explain how sort of Bitcoin's governance or lack thereof plays into its sort of long-term success?
Well, that statement I made was sort of like a realization as I made it. In other words, it's something I always knew about Bitcoin, but finally found a really simple way to say it.
Okay.
And so I think it's a very valuable statement. Not to be like toot my own horn or whatever, but I actually think that, like, please don't underestimate that statement. It's very important dynamic. Like, there are a lot of people that want to create a narrative where they think that, like, if we don't change Bitcoin, it's going to fall behind or get bad or break, or that code is never done. And they want to conflate a lot of these issues around Bitcoin. But in the end, what you would have to recognize is just literally, these are a minority of people with a motive. Now, a Bitcoiner's ability to discern, a attacker from somebody who is benevolent, from somebody who is just ignorant, like, is very small. Like our ability to separate these things is entirely trusted. We basically, it's a whole web of trust process or reputation process that is not in any formal in any way, but we basically outsource, our decisions about Bitcoin to people that we trust more than ourselves. And every single Bitcoiner does this. So like in the end, when you talk about consensus, what it means, like I said earlier, is all the people that agree, right? And so when you disagree, when you have a soft fork, when you want to add more rules, basically soft fork would be adding rules to Bitcoin, adding new rules, and a hard fork would be changing existing rules. And there's some nuance in there, but that's a good way to another kind of basic way to look at it.
Because from that you can extrapolate that a soft fork doesn't require a new node, whereas a hard fork does require a new node because a new node would.
Well, they all require new nodes.
But you don't have to run the new soft fork. You can continue with the old software.
Kind of.
Oh, really? Enlighten me.
The problem is that all soft forks are essentially hard forks in practice. Partially because there's some nuance there you could get into.
A tweet, by the way.
There's some nuance you could get into there, and we could counter me. But in general, the easiest way for me to argue that is impossible to counter is simply that because Bitcoin Core is the most prevalent implementation of Bitcoin. Basically, it's the implementation we rely on to secure Bitcoin. Because everybody ends up having to update to the latest version eventually. So it's not actually a opt-in process because they only support old versions for so long. The way that Bitcoin is designed, it's not designed so where there's like actually a core and then the other stuff changes. It's designed to where when you change it, core changes.
Right.
And so this is an issue, that now you're going to have this situation where whenever you want to make a change, you have to eventually adopt it, whether you disagree with it or not. And I can give you an example. I don't have anything bad or good to say about Taproot, but I never approved Taproot. I just didn't have a reason to. And so for a very, very long time, up until basically this year, I was running pre-Taproot nodes.
Okay.
But the problem with this is that they're not actually secure. You're not fully validating the chain. And now finally the versions I was running became too deprecated that they had too many security problems. So they don't maintain these old versions because there is no actual core. There's just the current version of Bitcoin and whether or not you're using the current version or a few versions back. And then they eventually just get rid of these versions. So you have to run these things.
Okay.
But to go back to your original question of, what I mean by Bitcoin government consensus is not built; it's enforced. It's just a simple. It's just a concept within the actual protocol of it. Of just this concept of enforcement means it's something that it's a rule that people are actually guarding, that people are actually enforcing. And so consensus is what we're all enforcing. In other words, we already have consensus. Everybody already agrees on the rules of Bitcoin. Yeah. That's all the nodes that we're running. We all agree. And so when someone comes in and they want to change, they're out of consensus. They're the ones with a motive. And so when they say building consensus, what they actually mean is undoing consensus, is being out of consensus, is changing consensus. What they mean to say is they are currently out of consensus and they would like everybody to join them, which is a much different thing than, it's not, you don't build consensus. You basically are like trying to persuade these people and coerce these people. There's not, most of the people, 99.9% of them don't even have any ability to like have agency in this decision. You know what I mean? Like even me, like I've been in Bitcoin a very long time. I'm not going to go in there and audit the code. I'm going to have to trust that there are a few people I would even trust in Bitcoin Core and those people have also audited this stuff and feel like it's safe. And even then, it's totally trusted. So I just don't think that we should have stuff this trusted. And then I'll follow that with.
Can I ask who are those people that you trust within Bitcoin Core?
I don't really know anymore. I would say basically the longer they've been here is probably one of the best indicators. Okay. Probably also whether they're a maintainer is a pretty good indicator. But even then, I don't know. My experience is trying to interact with Core and trying to research and analyze the way they've made decisions and the way they've handled controversies has not given me a lot of faith that they're going to handle every situation in the way that I would agree with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is that, can you name names?
I think that mostly you're going to get pretty good assessments from Gregory Maxwell,
Okay.
probably Peter Woolay as well.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it is probably nuance
Okay.
to go, plenty to spare.
Gosh, that's only two people. Two people that you look up to as okay.
And even them, I can say there GMAX has said things that I definitely disagree with. Now, do I think he might be able to refute me if we talked more? Possibly. But that's the difference in somebody you trust and somebody you don't, is that I think he might actually be smarter than me about those things, and I just don't realize it yet.
Okay. That's interesting because I'm sort of way downstream of all that because you're one of the people that I look to in these conversations and technical things. And it's also because I'm just way newer to Bitcoin than you are, because when you approach Bitcoin for the first time, you're like, oh yeah, it's just digital money in it. And then, you spend it, 10 hours and 100 hours and 1,000 hours. And then eventually you start running your own node, you start looking at more technical sort of issues. And you realize that, for example, Opcat, I only realized this the other day, it's, more than 10 years old. It was originally within Bitcoin and then they removed it in 2010 and now they're trying to bring it back. And, Covenants has been discussed for 10 years now or something like that. And
this is just trivia. Like, these are narratives that people use in order to diffuse the actual debate topic.
Well, exactly. But also it's just to show that, it shows that a lot of these things have been going on for a long time and they've still not got, for want of a better word, consensus.
Well, I mean,
against consensus.
The thing is that if you want to discuss like covenants, you can discuss the current meaning, the contemporary discussion of covenants, or you can discuss the concept of a covenant in the abstract. And yes, the concept of a covenant in the abstract, you can say that Bitcoin already has covenants. You could say all kinds of things to make the conversation provocative.
Right.
But those aren't useful things to discuss. You know what I mean? Like, that's why that's why I frame the conversation around the actual change and our ability to even assess the change. Mm-hmm. Because if we focus on the details, then we're just going to get lost in the details. We've already assumed the change.
Okay.
And I don't think that we are qualified to assess the change.
No, I think I understand. It's so do you even look at the detail, or is it not even worth it because it
depends. Eventually things get to be talked about enough where you have to learn the details because you have to humor people in how you argue. Right. Because what they do is they'll try to discredit you when you don't understand the details. And so even though you can fully argue the conversation in primitives or dynamics, and you can talk about how things work together in a physical sense, they don't care because you don't know this nuance. And now when you say that, when you repeat that nuance back to them incorrectly, you no longer have reputation with them because you're not speaking their shitcoin variety speak,
That's such a shitcoiner sort of play, Did you know that it does this?
Well, Bitcoiners do it too, though. For sure, Bitcoiners do it as well. Yeah. It's a engineering thing. Engineers will do this kind of thing. Anyway.
Okay. And so do you consider yourself an ossifier, or like what for you is someone that's pro Bitcoin ossification?
I think that's also not a useful way to frame the conversation.
Great. Okay.
People like it's an exaggeration. Like, nobody is saying that we could ever ossify Bitcoin in any way. Like, that's like predicting the future. Like, do I think Bitcoin will never change again? I don't know. I can't predict. Do I think it should change again? Maybe. Like, why do we have to pretend that we can predict the future in order to say intelligent things about Bitcoin? I don't think that's a requirement. I would rather see people have conversations about how we can become more informed about what Bitcoin is actually made out of and what the trends actually are of how people use Bitcoin, how it's affecting demographics. I would rather have a lot more statistics and data about this and awareness so we can make more informed decisions about whether or not to even care about scaling Bitcoin, for example. Like, people say scaling Bitcoin as if it's like an inevitable thing. Like, it's just, we'll do it eventually, and we'll definitely do it by sharing UTXOs. But this is just all speculation. This is just all a guess. And yes, technically we can string together this whole machine and make one thing go from the other end and make it work. But whether people use it, whether it helps them or solves their problems, is a totally different question. It's totally speculative, and we don't know. When we have some evidence today showing that Lightning, the most basic form of UTXO sharing, or the most enforceable, the most defensible, whatever word you want to use, even that, its growth has been more linear than exponential, and so it's not exactly been like changing the world or revolutionizing scale for Bitcoin. In fact, since Lightning's invention, we have only become more embedded with custodians and things like this. And even in the Lightning world, custodial applications are, much more popular. You get the idea.
Yeah.
I'm like ranting on, I don't even know what tangent I'm on now.
This is great. No, this is really useful stuff. It's so, okay. And is the word ossifier or ossification, was that technically an insult originally? Was it a bit like, how Vitalik called Maxis Maxis, and then Maxis took that label themselves?
It wasn't always that. Maybe it's becoming that way to some people. But, I think that no reasonable person thinks that Bitcoin should truly ossify, and no reasonable person thinks that Bitcoin needs a lot of features that it doesn't have yet.
Yeah.
Like it's somewhere in the middle. And that's why I mentioned like being more aware of demographics and statistics of how people actually use Bitcoin, how fees affect people, how cost of running node affects people, how hardware requirements affect people for nodes. All of these things, just having a constant awareness of those is going to make conversations about whether to fork Bitcoin more realistic. In other words, like, why should we make everybody trust us, the engineers? Why should the engineers make everybody trust them with a change and act as a central governance if it's something that, statistically or, looking at the research is going to prove that maybe we'll have like a 1% increase or it's very, very speculative. And I would rather see people find other ways to bolster their arguments and support them, substantiate their speculation. Because until they do, it's just like engineers crying because you won't give them a new toy, and then making up a bunch of stories about why, to their mother about why they need that toy and why the world will end if they don't get that toy. That's not genuine.
No, I mean, it was to your point about the scaling of Bitcoin as well. A lot of people make it sound like scaling Bitcoin is a life and death issue, and that thing of
and that it's even possible.
Yeah,
like by definition, Bitcoin is literally, it does not scale. It's like it's optimally or maximally redundant. That's by design. It is meant, like, just how it works is to not scale.
I think you're going to have to explain that a little bit more. Do you mean just by the nature of there's not enough UTXOs for everyone on the planet?
Well, the idea of scaling, so like people conflate, I did a good show on this with Eden Yago. You mentioned him earlier, outside of the podcast, but I did a good podcast with them about this topic maybe a year or two ago. Sorry, I had a brain fart. What was I just saying?
Don't worry, man. It's Friday afternoon. About how Bitcoin doesn't scale, and I said there's not enough UTXOs for everyone on the planet. And then
that's a separate nuance. But yeah, as far as like the Bitcoin doesn't scale, it's just that when you talk about scaling, some people like to talk about scaling the price, like how many, or scaling Bitcoin liabilities, how much people have exposure to Bitcoin.
Right.
But those things, again, are not useful in the context of talking about Bitcoin protocol, Bitcoin soft forks, etc., things like this. Because what you actually want when you want to scale is, if we put more resources into the network, we will get an expected amount of performance from those resources. So in other words, if we add more computers, we will be able to have more users.
Okay.
But Bitcoin doesn't do that. Every user requires their own node. So every single user is redundant. Like, they all are the same. And so for a true Bitcoin user, basically somebody running a node to check transactions that they're actually receiving
on their own keys.
And so when you have transactions to verify, you definitely want to be running a node. Yeah. So Bitcoin, by definition, does not scale because of how it works. In other words, the way we get around all of the double spending issues, et cetera, enforcing of the rules, how we achieve consensus, is just that we have this design where you have to run your own node and you have to keep a copy of the entire system.
Okay.
I know, in order to verify, or you at least have to download a copy of the entire system once, and you can delete it when you're done, but then you're not serving it to other nodes. Anyway, you get the idea. And so, when people talk about scaling Bitcoin, you can't actually scale Bitcoin. Now, you could hard fork Bitcoin and you could achieve some scale per node by making blocks bigger, for example. But this is, again, it's not a scale where you add more computers and you're getting more users. It's a scale where you add more cost per user.
So Bitcoin Cash is scaling Bitcoin.
In a way, sure. No, I think that increasing the block size is one of the few ways to actually scale Bitcoin. Now,
there's your soundbite, by the way.
It is. Well, it's one of the few proven ways, at least.
Okay.
Now we did it with SegWit. The blocks are bigger, and they've been mostly above 1 megabyte the entire time.
I think that's a really important thing that a lot of people don't realize as well. It's particularly for those that are new to Bitcoin, come in, say, in the last cycle, they don't realize that during the block size wars, there was actually a block size increase.
The block size wars are weird because I fought in them and did my part.
Are you doing this? Bcash?
Yeah. No. Zcash was just dancing. I'm doing air quotes on this for anybody who's just listening. Sorry, what was I saying?
The block size wars were a weird time.
Yeah, because the funny thing is they're called the block size wars, but the result was both sides ended up increasing the block size.
Yeah.
So I don't think they were the block size wars. I think it was the hard fork war. And we were deciding whether or not to stay one blockchain or become two. That's what the war was over.
But did the block size wars become one of those things that was called the block size wars afterwards, thanks to Jonathan Beer's book and just looking back?
No. We looked at it there. He called the book that because of it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't the thing that made.
He didn't name it
proliferate.
No. It was already the name at that point, and he was just naming it book accurately.
Okay, right. Yeah, because it was always
So look, I agree in that it wasn't accurate to name it that. That's why I'm bringing it up. It was definitely like a consensus community name or way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. We were trying. The fight for a while was that these guys wanted to increase the blocks, but the nuance was that they wanted it to be endless and obnoxiously large, and they wanted to fire Bitcoin Core developers. There was a bunch of other things they wanted too, which is what made everything a problem. In the end, Luke Dasher, again, he figured out a way to increase the block size without a hard fork by doing the SegWit weighting thing. And this allowed us to essentially quadruple the block space by adding basically a separate SegWit block.
Yeah.
I'm told we couldn't do that exactly again. In other words, that was a one-time trick that couldn't be. In other words, we can't turn that 4 into an 8 if we want. Okay. But I'm skeptical that there aren't. I believe that there are surely other ways to soft fork more block space into Bitcoin. And I definitely am not an advocate of hard forks. I think that a hard fork is basically a shitcoin.
Okay.
And I do think that it's okay for people who think that the design of Bitcoin is wrong to prove it elsewhere. If you think that Bitcoin with covenants is just better than Bitcoin, then I would say go ahead, make a shitcoin, make a fork, however you want to do it. Improve it. Show that because you have this on your blockchain, that people use your blockchain for that reason, and that because they use that on your blockchain, you have now figured out the user experience. You've now made this not suck. Then we can put it on Bitcoin and kill your shitcoin. But I just obviously the incentives are a little bit weird. I'm asking for a lot there, but it's still asking for less than every Bitcoiner to trust you with changing Bitcoin.
No, big time. And does that mean that there are, Bcashers and Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision people who are experimenting with covenants or OpCTV and all these things?
I don't know.
But why aren't they then? If that's not the play that you think is the most logical or most rational?
Well, part of it is expertise, right? All the people that want to work on covenants work on Bitcoin.
Yep.
Maybe now that I'm speaking ignorantly. From what I know, from what I've observed, it seems that way.
Okay.
It seems like that part of the problem is there simply aren't people that want to work on covenants for shitcoins.
Yeah.
That could be wrong. In other words, there may be, I'm sure there are some that are looking at, supporting some of the things that are, some of the soft forks that are proposed, whether it be CTV or OpVault or whatever, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if people at Litecoin would do it. But the problem is that the motivation coming from the shitcoin is harder because they're trying to figure out how to get funded, how to get money, how to scam, whatever it may be. They need an incentive that is more about income than about fixing Bitcoin, and so it's a little bit different.
Okay, and just going back to that point about Bitcoin does not scale, are you not at all sort of seduced by this whole savior complex in Bitcoin of we must onboard the entire world into Bitcoin? And I used to think this way quite a lot. When you first come into Bitcoin, you're like, oh well, this is it. Like we fix the money, we fix the world. We must tell everyone about this, and then you soon realize that. Well,
the reason I speak these ways is because I agree with you.
Okay.
I maybe it sounds crazy. I say, don't stop trying to change Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't scale. But I think I believe more strongly than some of the people that want those soft forks in the idea of getting as many people to use the Bitcoin blockchain as possible. My standards are coming from a different perspective. It's simply that I think that what they're doing is actually a waste of time, that they're actually taking huge risks without actually knowing anything about what the outcomes could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think there's another level of performance that we're denying ourselves by being distracted with this bullshit.
Okay. And what is in that? How do we unlock that other level?
Well, you just have to have higher standards. You know what I mean? Like, typically, necessity is the mother of all invention. In other words, if when the fees are $100 for every Bitcoin transaction for 3 months, I guarantee you there will be great scaling proposals that will emerge. Like,
do you mean that sincerely? I couldn't tell if you're being outright.
I mean it sincerely. Yeah. Like, I really do think that the problem is just that the incentives are wrong. You have these guys that are inventing these crypto gymnastics and then claiming these crypto gymnastics will save Bitcoin or let everybody use Bitcoin. And none of us are qualified to know whether or not they're bullshit or whatever. And so they don't have a lot of checks on their work.
Mm-hmm.
And their peers tend to actually be similar and support complexity and be interested in complexity.
Okay.
Luckily, though, so far, other than Taproot, Bitcoin maintainers have been pretty conservative in this regard. So
okay.
I'm not too worried, but I think that it's important to kind of push back on the culture becoming too comfortable. I like to keep the Overton window in a place that feels like a nice breeze for me. I don't want
keep that Overton window breezy.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Let's jump back over to the Lightning Network, which you did bring up briefly. So you've also been candid about the Lightning Network, and you said the Lightning Network protocol has about a year to cement its relevance. What do you mean by that? Is it not relevant? I've got a bloody tattoo on my arm here. It's relevant to me.
I mean, Lightning Bolt's always cool. Don't worry.
Yeah. I didn't get it for the Lightning Network, just for the record.
So just for the listeners, it's important to understand that, I work at a company that builds a Lightning product.
I use it.
We have a Bitcoin wallet. It supports Lightning, self-custodial Lightning. It's very, very difficult. And I'm sure you've noticed it's very, very difficult to have a self-custodial wallet for Lightning and have this be a good user experience.
Yes.
So, before you judge my criticisms, know that they come from deep experience. I was one of the first people in Bitcoin to kind of, on the product side, on the business development side, on the promotional side, to just be going all in, like, Lightning is ready. Back when, Elizabeth Stark and them were saying reckless, that Lightning was still reckless to warn people not to use it. Right. I was saying be reckless, use it. You know what I mean? Like, I've always been, gung-ho about Lightning and really, really optimistic about it. But now, years later, and having gone through it and having to actually implement it in our products, you get a much more clear view of what we're doing. After thinking more deeply about what happens at scale to Lightning, you realize that its impact is probably mostly limited to business-to-business use cases and not end-user use cases. And you've actually had some major entities kind of already admit this. Lightspark, for example. I
was just about to say, market.
Yeah. They recently just basically outright said is untenable, or, self-custodial Lightning on mobile is impossible. They said something like this.
I think that's the key thing there, is that when you're saying, Lightning has about a year to cement its relevance, you mean self-custodial Lightning, like proper Lightning.
I'll keep adding more nuance. So I mean more than that. I think that the Lightning industry has been subsidized heavily till now. Mm-hmm. There's a guy complaining about, he was comparing the prices of our Lightning channels to another wallet's Lightning channels, and I was like, dude, man, you don't understand. All of this is subsidized. These prices are all fake.
He was probably comparing Phoenix, no?
I think he was comparing Olympus, which is Zeus's LS.
Oh, right, yeah.
To Block Tank, which is ours, the one that powers BitKit.
Yeah.
And my guess is he was discovering something less than 0.5% difference of fee, ultimately, which is a difference, and it probably was only for that specific use case, that specific configuration. And so I wasn't worrying too heavily about it, because my view on this is, I would probably need to double or quadruple prices for this to be a reasonable business model. You know what I mean? Like this is entirely funded by Lightning companies. All of the Lightning network is just funded by Lightning companies and VCs.
Well, good thing the price is going up.
And then this is another issue for Lightning because now what do you think when Bitcoin becomes scarce and more popular? What do you think the cost of renting Bitcoin will become? What will the interest rate on Bitcoin be? Because in order for a LSP to provide liquidity, they have to have more Bitcoin than they own, or put Bitcoin that they own at risk in hot wallets. You know what I mean? And so, the larger nodes right now, like Bitfinex, things like this, they have incentive, they have appropriateness. They already have to keep their system very secure. They already are an exchange, so they're like a major hub. Mm-hmm. These kinds of things are practical. So I mentioned that for B2B, I think Lightning may always have a place because Lightning's core use case is high frequency transacting. That's what it provides. And so businesses that, need to settle often, like for example, like BitRefill, they have a program where you can embed their product into other products. You may have noticed you can shop at BitRefill and some other wallets and things like this.
Oh yeah.
Why was I bringing up BitRefill?
Business to business.
Oh yeah, so when I worked there, I set up with Bitfinex, and that was when I was kind of trying to convince them to support Lightning.
Yes, you could trade or whatever and get your Bitcoin on Bitfinex, and you could buy a SIM card or a Uber voucher on Bitfinex.
Right, but what happened was I was trying to convince Bitfinex to embed. I worked at BitRefill, and I was trying to convince them to embed BitRefill in their application, their platform. Mm-hmm. But as part of that, I was also trying to hype Lightning. We were doing one of the first LSPs, if not the first, called Thor from BitRefill. Back then, it was an LSP with selling Lightning channels, and so I wanted to try to get business development going for that as well. And so I managed to convince Bitfinex to also run a Lightning node and support Lightning, with the idea being that we would have basically no credit settlement, so instant settlement. So whenever one of their users buys a gift card, instead of the user paying BitRefill, Bitfinex pays it. And so Bitfinex takes the balance out of the user's account, pays, and there's just one Lightning channel between Bitfinex and BitRefill. And so every time there's a purchase of a gift card, everything is dynamically settled between Bitfinex's gift card vendor, between Bitfinex and the user. The whole thing is just a string of instantly settled transactions. So there's no more like 30-day settlement needs or banking transaction needs. This kind of thing is great, but this is not
like an energy service provider or something like that. Your gas bill or your electricity bill, that could be done.
Well, it could be anything that you want to pay in Bitcoin that is more frequent than is worth to pay on chain. That's the actual mathematical calculation.
Okay. Yeah.
So in other words, if I say you're my landlord and I know I'm going to pay you 12 times this year, or maybe I make a 2-year contract, I'm going to pay you 24 times.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to pay you €1,000 a month. Well, if it's $10, say it's $100 for a Bitcoin fee, well, I'm definitely going to open a channel, right? I'm going to say, okay, I have to pay this guy 24 times. I'm just open a channel to this guy.
Right.
So I'll pay the fee once or twice, and instead of paying it 12 times.
Okay.
Yeah. So you need at least the kind of 4 or 5 transactions to get the full value out of a Lightning channel.
Okay.
But once you get beyond that, it's all cream. So
yeah,
that's the idea. Now, I mentioned, going back to the original question of Lightning doesn't have long to prove viability, I mean, the current promise of Lightning. In other words, the current promise of Lightning is that there will be startups. It's already degraded from there used to be. There were going to be Lightning apps, and everything was going to be like Lightning. The web would be on Lightning. That was a stage we went through, and it's come back a little bit more to reality from there. But yeah,
now it's just payments, right? But I mean, we've seen so many wallets fall off in the past year. Most of them were the custodial ones, but I mean, I know that people in the US really struggle with just being able to pay for stuff normally, because all the go-to custodial ones, I know it's not technically Lightning, but they're all gone. The non-custodial ones, like Mutiny was the latest one to go. I don't think Phoenix is in the US anymore. Zeus, I think, is still there.
They're American, yeah.
Yeah, and then Blue Wallet, of course, Sunset. It's
Lightning,
semi-custodial. Like it was non-custodial, but
no, it was.
You had the keys to it, but also it could rug you. It was kind of.
And that wasn't keys. You had it. You had it, but information. That's it. Yeah. It was custodial. They did have in their beta. They were the first ones to have LDK in a dev mode in their app, but they removed that and didn't go to production with it, as far as I know.
So, right. Okay. Yeah. So what are users going to be transacting with in a year's time or 2 years' time if Lightning doesn't achieve, doesn't achieve its cement its relevance, to steal your words?
Yeah. Well, to kind of finish that answer a little bit more, because there was another nuance I wanted to add, which is simply that because it's a subsidized aspect of the industry, that means that there is a budget for subsidizing speculative things in the industry, and that budget will naturally be competitive. Right. And so what will happen over time is, just like we saw with shitcoins, there will be technologies that will gather momentum and will gather investment. And Lightning has one more year or so left, I think, to hold the momentum it has before it starts leaking it to other ideas.
Okay.
So, eventually somebody's going to figure out covenants on BitVM, and there's going to be a covenant app that uses Bit. You know what I mean? Like, eventually there's going to be things that evolve, and we're going to have to adjust.
Okay. So we're still going to be using Bitcoin as a payments protocol on a personal level,
unless we're willing to scale on chain. I don't think it's realistic to believe that we actually want to add as many people as possible into Bitcoin. Okay. Now, do I think that by scaling on chain we could add everybody to Bitcoin? No. That's not what I'm saying. So you have to accept these windows of nuance, because people will say, "Oh, John believes in bigger block. He's a big blocker." It's like, no. It's simply that I believe that if you want to add more people to Bitcoin, that this is one of the things that you will have to do, and one of the most practical and evidenced things that you could do. And when I compare this to something like the Lightning Network phenomenon of, that industry that was born and subsidized and et cetera, and the complexity that came with it and what it requires to make an application that supports it, all these things, if I compare these, I look longingly at the other one. You know what I mean? I think, oh man, like, if I could go back to a time where Bitcoin was just using zero-conf transactions, and so what if it costed me $100 more a year to run a node? Like, I would be pretty happy. I would be pretty happy building that product. Right. I would be pretty happy trying to figure out how to make it safer for merchants to accept zero-conf transactions. Okay. Like these were things I was already working on before, but was kind of undermined in other ways. Some of that is idealistic, but so is what we have now, and what we have now is proving to not really work, in my opinion. Like, I think Lightning works, but for end users, for consumers, for things like this, Lightning is just going to become too expensive. Like, that the value of a Bitcoin transaction is just going to become exclusively high over time. And so right now, people want to blame, NFTs and the ordinals and people filling up blocks, but if it wasn't that, it would be something else. Like, in other words, there's always going to be a most popular use case of Bitcoin, and all the people who don't use it for that way are going to complain about those people making it too expensive for them. Right. And so if it wasn't that, it will be something else. For example, let's say Bitcoin becomes very expensive, and we notice that most of the transactions are businesses opening up channels to each other, but they can afford the $1,000 for a transaction. Right. But they do this because they have to do many transactions and they want to save thousands of dollars. Yeah. And so it all makes sense to them. But people that are normies that still have some Bitcoin and they want to be able to transact with it, they're going to blame. You say businesses have taken over Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. All the transactions
spanning the chain with
all the
transactions.
It's just all exchanges and banks opening channels. Like, it's like, okay, but like, what did you expect? Like, that's what happens when you limit the growth, because the block size has to have a limit, and when you limit it too much, then you're basically deciding the economy of Bitcoin, the actual size of the economy, and anything that you don't allow within that economy is going to leak into a different economy. It's going to go into banks, custodians, shitcoins, whatever it may be, depending on the use case of the person. Okay. People who will only want price exposure will use ETFs and banks, and they'll be fine. But people who actually want to use a blockchain for some reason, they'll probably just use shitcoins. And so the more people invest in Bitcoin, the more users Bitcoin have, the higher the on-chain fees go. And the higher the on-chain fees are, the more demographic you exclude from Bitcoin. Yeah. And that's just economics. Like, there's nothing you can do about that other than try to figure out where the sweet spot is of how expensive can we make nodes to run without it becoming a centralization risk. Because we have two centralization risks. Well, we have more than that, but in this case, we have the risk of centralization due to the cost of running a node. In other words, if it costs $10,000 to run a node, obviously there will be many fewer people running nodes. But if it costs $10,000 to make a transaction, you have the same right. You have the same problem. So I actually think the transaction costs are worse than the node costs because there's no way they reach parity like that. You know, in other words, yeah, transaction fees could raise. Like I think $100 transaction fees constant would be very exclusive. It would exclude a ton of people from using Bitcoin, and that means it excludes a lot of the promises of Bitcoin, like saving oppressed people and poor people, bringing poor people out of it's just gone.
Yeah. It's
and it'll turn that into tragedies of custody. In other words, they'll have to learn all those poor countries that get into Bitcoin in custodial ways. They're also more likely to have less trustworthy people as custodians and people that are more desperate to take their money as a custodian. And so it's just a higher risk situation. And imagine your first experience with Bitcoin being that you got rug pulled.
That is most people's first experience with Bitcoin, particularly in emerging markets.
Yeah,
there's so many Bitcoin scams there, whether it's Senegal or South Africa or Peru,
and then you just end up using Tether or something because you don't want to get scammed anymore.
Yeah. Okay, ergo Bitcoin does not scale. Okay, understood. I mean,
I mentioned one more thing.
Yeah.
In addition to block space, I do think that people think I sound ridiculous when I say this, but I do think you honestly could invest in advancing hardware technology to make Bitcoin more scalable. Obviously, everything more scalable, the whole net. But in other words, if you're actually so super concerned about the scale of Bitcoin long term, there's no reason why you shouldn't be trying to make hard drives cheaper. Innovating on ways to store data and innovating on ways to transmit data and making, in other words, until we reach the speed of light for data and, basically free for data for disk space, you have plenty of room to innovate, you know what I mean, on scaling Bitcoin on the hardware level.
Yeah.
Because if you're concerned about how much it costs to run a node, but we get the costs to run down on the hardware level, now you've achieved scale or potential scale.
Okay. I mean, to run a node nowadays is literally an old computer. I mean, you've got to have what is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think most of the arguments about cost of running a node are just bullshit.
Yeah.
We just have to humor them because they're rational.
Yeah.
But they are mostly bullshit. Like most people have a laptop, an old laptop, an old desktop, something they could use as a node. Most people that can afford to have Bitcoin can afford to save, thus can afford a $300 computer just as a Bitcoin node if they really want that. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I don't think that's why people don't run nodes. People don't run nodes because they don't have the incentive. They're not merchants. They don't have people trying to scam them with double spends, things like this. So they just don't see the reason to.
Yeah. So therefore it becomes transactions fees is the most important of attack vector to scaling Bitcoin. Like
even if we make the node free to run, people might not run it.
They want to run it. That's why ETF.
Well, if it's, I don't want to go too far. If it's free, we can just like embed it in things and they'll run it without knowing.
True.
But
nice way of doing it.
Yeah, but that's
But
it won't be free. It's always going to be a high resource thing because it's constantly downloading data.
I mean, it comes down to an ideological thing, which is how I want to ask the next question. After this, we're going to do a speed round, and then we're going to come back to your questions. So every progressive deserves every tier of frustration until they realize Bitcoin is not their playground. What are your thoughts on how the Bitcoin community handles ideological diversity and technical debate?
Well, I mean, that comment was probably more around the soft fork thing. But
we've talked you to death, don't worry.
No, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to focus on the last part of your question, which is, what do I think about ideological or the sincerity of debate or the seriousness of it? I think a lot of it is pretty biased and distorted, and I think probably every single one of us is incapable of having a pure debate about Bitcoin.
I know I'm incapable.
It's pretty difficult when you own it. And then when you don't own it, it's pretty difficult because you're ignorant, and you don't know what it's like to own it and what it actually does, how it actually works, etc. So
one of my one of my most liked tweets in my history, and this is so embarrassing, is in 2020 or 2021. I replied back to Lynn Alden. Lynn Alden was saying something along the lines of, so many journalists will never understand Bitcoin because they weren't allowed to hold it at their jobs. I commented back, and this is when I was very, very early on, like being online with Bitcoin. This tweet got like 3,000 likes or something, and it was basically me being like, now that I've bought some Bitcoin, I suddenly realize how wrong I was. And by the way, sorry for the FUD pieces. No, I'm actually like learning and studying.
I think I remember seeing this actually.
It went like mega viral, and I said, "Oh my god, what have I done?" But it's true. Like, if you don't own any of it, you never understand. Or because once you first send your first transaction, and for me as well, it was the sort of clicking download on Bitcoin Core and being like, "Whoa, that's the blockchain. It's on my computer screen now." It's a bit of a light bulb moment, or like the first time you see the transaction go, and you hit send, and then you're like, "Well, nothing's happened for a while," and then oh shit, it's being put in this brand new block. And so yeah, I think that people that don't buy it, and I think it's different just buying some on Coinbase, but don't interact with it in a meaningful way, how you can have a proper debate about it.
I think that people confuse their passion for something, their severity of interest for something, with severity of truth, and you know what I mean, this kind of thing. And they just think that the more emotionally attached they are, the more true and more that belief must be. And this happens to a lot of us sometimes, and some of us all the time. And I think you see this a lot in Bitcoin, where you have entire narratives, entire paradigms that have been invented within Bitcoin that are just built on garbage. Like they're just built on hopium, built on, Ponzi desires, like just so much of this, probably most of it, honestly. So no, I don't think the level of discourse is very high. I think that even among the people that could have high discourse, it's difficult because of politics and emotions and things like this. So yeah, it's a minefield. Now, I'm comfortable with arguing in this kind of thing and trying to keep emotion out of it, but it hasn't really gotten me very far with wanting things to be my way in the Bitcoin world. So I don't know. I just think I think that my philosophy is a healthy one. You know what I mean? In other words, just be conservative. Don't trust everybody. Don't trust most people, because everybody has some sort of incentive that is not your incentive. And so you have to trying to decipher what people truly mean, what their actual motives are. Yeah, that's what we have to do as humans, but it's tiring, and you don't have to participate. You don't have to accept that this idea that somehow I have to be knowledgeable on every software proposal. This is preposterous. You know what I mean? Like it's not reasonable.
Well, I feel like as a journalist in this space, I have to be, and then you forget sometimes, like, why do they want me to be knowledgeable about this? And I think that's an important thing to understand. Is like, why do we need to have this debate? Why do we need to have the discussion? When, let's be honest, most people nowadays are buying Bitcoin through an ETF. Some people are custodying. Some people, even smaller still, are running a node. And so, yeah, it does seem that more and more we are scaling Bitcoin by custodians. And that's of course not.
The problem is that some of these things that become narratives or trends or topics are just like technical perversions of people. It's just like they have this interest in like seeing reality twist a certain way and being able to have control over reality in that way, and they just become obsessed with getting their way, and it often has very little to do with some sort of benevolence, which is what we all want to believe.
Yeah. And yeah, the thing about the philosophy, by the way, I wasn't saying that your philosophy is the best. I was saying that we all think our own.
Yeah. I was confused. I was like, really?
I gave me a funny look, and I was like, no,
that's not my impression.
We're not all worshipping your philosophy, don't worry. Okay, so quick round. Only allowed one or two, three words max per question. So, can pineapple go on pizza?
Sure.
Cool. Bits or sats?
No.
Neither. It's just Bitcoins, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I actually really like that in the BitKit wallet, by the way, that it is just Bitcoins. I don't know if anyone's used the BitKit wallet.
Well, the cool part is we don't have to say it. It just is it. Like we don't say Bitcoins. You don't have to say it in an app. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So what's one change that Bitcoin should never ever implement?
All of them.
Hashtag Ossify. What would you ask Satoshi if you could?
Is he ever going to move the coins? That's all anybody cares about.
True. Is there one thing you care about more than, I know that's the question that a lot of people would be interested in.
No. And I've said this in a few interviews this year, because usually people don't ask, but like, I am not the kind of person that like has an answer for like, if you could have dinner with anybody from history, who would it be? Or if you could ask anybody, I don't think about these things. I don't know.
I used to say Satoshi. I used to be like, but then the more and more you research, you're like, oh, he was just a dude like everyone else, or a proof of
Well, the thing is, we probably know Satoshi. Like, he's probably in the Bitcoin world. You know what I mean? He's probably part of it somehow. And so
think he's alive.
you're just going to find out who he is, or he could be dead, he could be alive. Either way, you're going to find out, and it's going to be somebody you never heard of or somebody you did. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know what I would ask him. Like, I don't have a pressing question. Like, that honestly is the best question. Like, what would be the most useful question to know? Do you still have the keys to those things? Are you going to do something with with that Bitcoin? Like, is this going to be like a major news headline someday?
Yeah.
Or are you going to, are they burned or are they dead? What's your plan there?
Okay.
I think that's the biggest impact thing of Satoshi.
Yeah.
That was not a short answer. Sorry.
That's okay. What's one thing Bitcoiners need to do better as a community?
Be less tribal.
Be less tribal.
Yeah. Use better heuristics on how you assess things.
Very good. And you've kind of answered this already, but I've written it down, so I'm going to ask you the question. Would Bitcoin succeed without the Lightning Network?
Sure. It already did. It already is.
Yes, true. I guess looking at it anachronistically, then yeah, it did work. Yeah. Okay. We've done the lightning round. Congratulations. You get sats at the end of the interview.
Bitcoins.
I've already messed up. I want to switch to Nostr versus PubKey. Well, not versus. It's not the wrong way of framing it, but the reception of PubKey in Nosterland was quite funny. That's why I'm saying it in that way. And then also talking about a bit of the future of Bitcoin and your arrival into Bitcoin versus what you think of Bitcoin now as the sort of the next second part. We call it the last part of the interview as well, if you like. So first thing on PubKey. Now, I've watched the talk of you delivering the speech about PubKey. I watched it in person and then I watched it again online. And then I even watched the AI discussion because you created an AI podcast where two hosts or like an interviewee and a host or something discussed. And they're doing way better than I'm doing right now. PubKey and how it works. And yet I still don't think I quite understand it because I think I need to use it or to see it being used to understand it better. But could you try to explain what PubKey is rather succinctly?
So I'll start with the simplest way to look at it. It builds on the most simple concept would be, you know what a public key is, right? Like you use these for Bitcoin to get paid. Well, Bitcoin didn't invent these. These key pairs have been used, since before Bitcoin as a way to authenticate or prove yourself digitally, whether it be to sign things or to log into an application. Some people use this like PGP keys to sign code. So what PubKey is it takes a public key and you use it as a domain name.
Okay.
That's probably the most normie way to describe one of the most basic parts of PubKey. It's just simply the idea of instead of using domain names, which are owned by an authority, ICANN and different domain registrars that administer these domain names, which are ultimately censorable and can be seized, you use a public key. And the way that you can achieve this, this public key domain or a self-sovereign domain, is we take these public keys, we sign the equivalent of a DNS record, which is the same way websites work. So you take your web domains where when you buy a web domain, when you want to actually have a website on it or email on it, you have to tell the domain registrar which servers to point at. In other words, okay, you have the name, but where does it take me, right? The same thing is true about PubKey. So now you take that key and you basically create a DNS record signed by that key, and you put it in what's called mainline DHT. Mainline DHT is a massive, probably the largest decentralized network on the internet, peer-to-peer network. It's used to power BitTorrent.
Right.
So the network that's connecting all the people downloading torrents from each other and this kind of thing, and syncing that up and routing it. That's called mainline DHT.
Okay.
And so we don't use torrents and we don't use any of the other data. All we use is this distributed hash table. And so it's a type of network that keeps a very small amount of data in this very intentional structure to where it makes it very fast to find which nodes have the data and which nodes don't. And certain regions are responsible for keeping data. So there's redundancy within the regions, but then there's regions that are distinct. So Quite simply, we use a very decentralized network to be able to store your DNS records that were created by your key.
Okay.
So this gives you the idea that now, say your key is 12345. Obviously, it will be longer than this. It'll include letters and such. Now, no matter what happens to you, you can always change those DNS records, which servers point to things. So the idea here is not only is this a domain that's a key, but it's now you can use it as an identity. And so you can say, okay, let's say you have your key and you use that key to make a social media account on a website. And now that website censors you. They kick you off. Well, if that website is using the pub key system, in other words, which obviously they are if you logged in using this method, then if they start to censor you, they misbehave in some way, what you can do is you can update your DNS record. And you can say, okay, now instead of going there for my social media posts, go somewhere else or go to my server. So basically you have the option to self-host or choose any other trusted host for anything. This can be for payment endpoints, for your blog, for social media, for photos, whatever use case you would want. So it's sort of like a mix between thinking of it of like using Google Cloud, but using Twitter. So you kind of have this ability to imagine if all your data came from you, you know what I mean? And whenever you outsource somebody else to host that data for you, which is a need on the web, you could do so safely because even if they misbehave, you control the definition of that data.
Right.
So no matter what that happens to them or what they say, as long as you are willing to either host it yourself or you can find another host, then you can just migrate and hot swap. And then the users of the client applications, the people you interact with, they will automatically be sent to the right place because now when they go look you up, you look up your domain name, they are going to find a different server for that location.
Does that mean that they can't sell on your data in this PubKey world?
They can't what?
They can't sell on your data, and
almost the opposite. I mean, it depends on how you look at it. There's public data. Public data is public, right?
Yeah.
So selling on or gathering the data, scraping the data could be done by anybody that wants to access the public data. Like, consider like if Twitter had a totally open API, people could just scrape every single tweet and all of the data that Twitter gave them about the tweet.
Yeah.
Now, ultimately data has to live on a server, so whether or not which data was exposed would depend. But yeah, any public data would be something that would be scrapable. This is something people are realizing with like Blue Sky, for example, which has become pretty popular in the past few weeks. A lot of the left.
Does it really?
Yeah, 20 million people are using Blue Sky.
I signed up 9 months ago and went on for a bit and was like,
they've had a few people. They seem to get spurts of growth when there are political events.
Just like Noster.
Well, it's like political events about left versus right. So whenever like Twitter does something, whenever people want to, like Elon does something that drives the left crazy, some of them move to Blue Sky.
Right.
This seems to have been the trend. And then obviously with Trump getting elected, there was a big migration.
Yeah.
And so that was a big driver for the recent growth. But yeah, even with Blue Sky, you're going to see these kinds of things having to be dealt with because people on Blue Sky thought they were going to like the old Twitter, the way it used to be when Jack was running it and more liberal and such. And they're specializing in moderation. But now there are people gathering all the data and doing statistics on the data and, generating reports that they don't like. And they're like, they didn't realize that, when you make a public peer-to-peer system that all the data is available. So sorry for that tangent, but yeah, it's important to remember when something is social or public, you have no control over what people do with the data.
Okay, and so PubKey can't solve that. It's not.
Well, no, that's not true. I'm addressing something specific, and that's not true. I'm addressing something specific, and so the nuance would be public versus private data.
Yeah.
If you want to set up systems for private data, there's no reason you couldn't do that. PubKey is just everything else about PubKey is the same as the web.
Okay.
So in other words, it's just saying instead of using ICANN for domain names, we're using keys and mainline DHT for domains.
Right. Okay.
And everything else, anything you could do in the web otherwise could still be done within PubKey.
I think I'm just trying to get to the why. Like why create PubKey in the first place? So what's the actual problem it's trying to solve?
Well, so I mean, there are other things we're doing in PubKey. I've simplified it to just this key.
No, you need to keep simplifying it more.
And so, sorry, what was your original question?
Why PubKey? A lot of people, I mean, particularly in the crypto space, a lot of people are very quick to highlight all the problems with the web, and then it's buy my shitcoin because it does this wonderful thing where we're going to stop using Google and Facebook and everything else and log in with Twitter or whatever it is, and instead we're going to do it with my Web3 shitcoin thing. Is it wrong of me to frame PUBG a little bit in that?
Oh, certainly it would be wrong. I mean, we're not sell anything,
No,
right? It's like we're not trying to sell anything. There's no coin. There's no blockchain. It's not even a Bitcoin project.
No, it's an internet.
There's not even Zaps. Like it's just actually a peer-to-peer. We're trying to fix the web. Okay. So we're trying to say this is the next web. Yeah. And in order to, and what we think
what Web3 did.
Well,
that's what I mean in my framing.
Well, Web3 did, okay, but Web3 obviously didn't do that in any sort of pure sense or even close to a pure sense. They adopted it as a narrative for what they other things they wanted to do.
But the messaging was always quite compelling because we all know surfing the web. I sound like a boomer saying surfing the web, but the idea that all our data is leaked, shared, and everyone can go on have I been pwned, .com, and you'll realize all these horrible email leaks and
these are just. I mean, blockchain does nothing to fix those problems, at least for the most part.
But the good thing about that was that it raised awareness that when you're online, you are constantly being used or exploited in some way by other people, and people know that this is an issue. And so is that the why of PubKey? Is that why PubKey is coming in and saying, okay, we agree that all of these things are the issues, but rather than addressing it with a blockchain or something, we're addressing it with, public-private keys and the mainland DHT and the...
Well, the idea, like I said, was to fix the web. So the idea is basically to assess what we think is wrong with the web. And what I think is wrong with the web is basically walled gardens, kind of what you mentioned, like poison algorithms, and censorship. Yeah. And those are the three things I brought up in the presentation as well. And so that's basically what we're trying to address with PubKey is how can we mitigate those issues as much as possible to the point where we actually can create like a parallel economy, essentially. So I think that when it comes to the censorship, we discussed how we could get around that, right? So basically you have what's called a credible exit. So you have a credible way that that you could opt out of a bad situation at any time and still respawn, as yourself without disruption, to your peers and this kind of thing.
Great use of respawn, by the way.
And so that's the censorship part. The walled garden part is very similar. So because you have that power, now if you can opt into systems that can't lock you in. So in other words, we're going to we're doing it privately right now, but in Q1 next year we'll have a PubKey app, and in that app we'll demonstrate social media features, publishing features, all the kind of things you would expect to be able to use PubKey for.
Okay, Q1 2025.
Yeah. So we'll do a private beta probably in 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll try to do the public beta as soon as possible after that, depending on bugs and such.
Okay, and without a token, how are you going to make money?
Well, I'm trying to think of how to tactfully answer this question. I'll just be funny. We're owned by Tether.
Oh, okay. Don't need
but that's not really the honest answer. The honest answer is that when we created and founded Synonym, and we always had a plan for developing an entire ecosystem of products that all work together. And so this is kind of like almost like version 1 of this plan is shipping the PubKey core protocol, PubKey app, the BitKit app, and then by the end of next year, having all of these things integrated in interesting ways. Okay. So when they decided to fund this company, they decided to fund that stature of a vision. Right. And so that's why we're doing this is, in other words, we've been funded to develop this whole idea. Yeah. And so the point at which we assess whether or not it's valid or make money has not come yet.
Oh, I see. So it's sort of like a research project until it becomes a company, right? I mean, I know it is a company for all intents and purposes, but companies are supposed to also make money and profit and that kind of stuff.
I mean, and I certainly think we have many ways that we could make money. Yeah. But if I were to focus on making money right now, I would have to speculate a lot. Like, for example, I could do my best to make money with Blocktank and Lightning in the LSP. Right. And how far do I think that could actually get me right now? Honestly, I don't think it would get me profit. Yeah. It's getting nobody else any sort of mentionable profit. Right. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that making money is the best way to look at it. I think that you do want to always be getting users. You always want to be trying to show, actual utility and relevance. And so that's something that we will definitely be working on in 2025, like marketing and things like this. You've seen us work a little bit with you as well, but we're just getting started there. So I think that making money is easy when you have lots of activity.
Right.
And so like if there are a lot of people using the app, or a lot of people building with PubKey Core, a lot of people making payments through our Lightning node, whatever it may be, once you have scale of users, it just becomes which method can you use to make money without losing them. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's super interesting. It's making more and more sense to me the more and more I understand it. But I've never been much of a theory kind of thinker. I have to see it, use it, and then be like, okay, it's just like.
It's been hard. It's been hard to convince people outside the company, sometimes people even in the company, that we're trying to do something that is more of a, I don't know, like an orchestra, that we're actually trying to coordinate more than one thing, more than one product, and have them all work together. Sometimes even within our own teams, like we'll have somebody that's only in one of the teams where they're not necessarily exposed to the full vision all of the time and how everything can interact, where it's not always clear to them. You know what I mean? And they question like, oh, this might not work. And it's like, I know it might not work, but like, we can't actually know until we have the whole thing in place.
Right. Okay.
And I'm just trying to, I think that we have a vision or an experiment that we want to run that is novel. And that's the only experiment worth running is a novel one. And we're just trying to have the most novel or the most viable experiments. Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned research. Yeah, I mean, we're not a nonprofit. We're not a lab, but we do a lot of research, and that involves sometimes actually throwing away products and work. Mm-hmm. We've probably thrown away as many products as we've released and thrown away as much code as we've published.
Okay.
So yeah, there is a research aspect to figuring out actually delivering this vision. Even with PubKey, like we had a different version of it before called /tags, and that was a totally different design. That was based off of using append logs and a smaller DHT type, and we eventually decided that wasn't the best path, that wasn't the best design.
Okay.
And so we ended up throwing away that.
That's cool. That was going to be one of my questions, because I remember again trying to learn about /tags and being like, cool, and then it never came to fruition, whatever it may be.
Part of with /tags and just in general, part of the process is just like learning what you even want, learning how to actually like turn your requirements and render them into features and things like this. And so with /tags, like all of the same initiatives were there, all the same motives were there, what we were trying to do, but we came into it through a lens of technology recommendations that came baked in. In other words, when I joined the Tether family was currently researching that stack. The what's now called Hole Punch was formerly called Hypercore, and so we were trying to build /tags through the lens of Hypercore. That ended up being overkill for what our actual requirements were, and through that research and discovery, through like figuring out things we wanted to do to mutate Hypercore. We realized that there was already a solution for us in mainline DHT.
Okay. And to that point of not struggling, but just, the challenge in conveying that whole vision to people, you're saying within the company, within people at the company, it can be a bit problematic. How has PubKey been received in Nostr land, where I worry that people might see it as like adversarial or something. And also I worry that Nostr is also quite religious sometimes. It's quite hard sometimes to have
I would use tribal over religious.
Tribal.
I'm not sure much difference, but
I mean, I'm an avid Nostr user, right? And I love it, and I think that there's a lot of really good feedback, but I also don't quite understand it yet, and I haven't. I mean, I get being zapped for stuff is awesome, but then whenever I try to, like, in my own way, I try to push back and say, listen, I made more money every month this year on Twitter than I did on Nostr. Explain me that, and people are like, oh, well, you can't, on Nostr you're getting, a finite money, and on Twitter you're getting fiat. And it's like, well, yeah, but also I can buy Bitcoin, not born guys. This kind of stuff. Oh, on Nostr it's no KYC. I'm like, yeah, but come on, if I'm getting 10.
But we have an ID.
Yeah. It's a lot of sort of, I get that. And also
I get it too.
So challenge this and question it and query it.
Well, it's the same. The problem with Nostr, well, on that level, the cultural problem with Nostr is the same as with Bitcoin. And it's been imported from Bitcoin, basically.
Innovation, man.
Yeah, really. I was trying to become like habitually like tearing them off and actually throwing them on the ground on purpose, but I'm too lazy.
You know, Ricky and Laura, Bitcoin explorers. He said that he was in I think it was like Africa or something recently, and he went to open one of these bottles. He's dropped on the floor, and he was like, "Oh my god!" It's because he's now just so used to it, stuck on. So
Yeah. I just hate like when you're drinking and like sometimes some water gets on the side and it fall on your face.
yeah, or you hit your nose on it.
Yeah.
I was in Thailand 2 weeks ago, and taking the bottle cap off was just like, it was just a really great moment.
Where were we?
Yeah, sorry. European innovation. Noster, and sort of, yeah. How's it been received in Noster first?
So yeah, I got the reaction I pretty much expected, because of what we were just discussing, where I think a lot of the culture was imported from Bitcoin. And the problem is that it's not like something you can map perfectly from Bitcoin to Nostr. In other words, the idea of peer-to-peer, self-sovereign web, even key-based, as Nostr also is, you can't just directly translate it. There's no need to be a Nostr maximalist or to like try to build consensus for certain nips and proposal. Like all of that stuff is much less consequential than it would be with Bitcoin, and it's much more subjective and much more speculative. It's just all a bunch of like web devs just trying to theorize about ways that they could rebuild the web based off of the system that they have, this Nostr system. Now, obviously, not maybe it's not obvious, but honestly, if I thought that Nostr had what we needed and was good enough to ship the mission that we're trying to ship, I would have just used it. But the truth is that we've been trying to build this since before Nostr existed. In fact, we tried to hire the guy that built Nostr before he built it. And so there's just history from before Nostr. And so we've always had this perspective of looking at it as, is this a solution for us? Is this what we could use? Yeah, of course, when our plan was already to bootstrap through Bitcoiners a key-based web, and Nostr did it before us, and to watch, it get traction and things like that is difficult. But I'm not going to make a decision just because of FOMO. You know what I mean? I'm not going to say, oh, looks like we better just, capitulate and use Nostr now because that's what Bitcoiners like. No, like I don't think that Nostr is that much gravity to just obey and capitulate like that. I also don't think the design is good enough to just rest on our laurels and say, okay, this is good enough, let's just go with this. They did not address the main thing that PubKey addresses, the thing I explained to you, where you can have, basically you can be the authority on where your data is.
Right.
They don't have that, and they're going to eventually reinvent it. And they're already talking about making their own DHT and things like this. But we went through all of that. We went through that research. We went through using a smaller DHT. We went through the ideas of deciding whether to bootstrap our own that just worked the way we wanted, and comparing that to mainline. We did a bunch of research that we're going to publish on like the actual decentralization of mainline. Like, we made a calculated decision, and we think this is what's most viable. And so that's why we did it. It's not a tribal thing. It's just that I think that Nostr should use PubKey. Like, in other words, they're not perfect. They're not like two totally competitive analog things to compare. Like, there's aspects of PubKey that would improve Nostr that is very difficult for them to deny. The problem is that to do some of the things that PubKey does, you would need to break Nostr, and you would need to change the way the keys are made, etc. Because Nostr, for some reason, intentionally chose to use the Bitcoin curve, the SecP 256K,
right?
K1. They chose to use that, but there was no special reason to use it. And actually, other curves are more compatible with, or have more, tooling and things like this. And in order to use mainline DHT for the way that we use it, you have to use a different curve than what Nostr uses. So in order to use this solution, they would have to all agree to a breaking change. Yeah. They call this a non-starter. We actually told them about this idea a year ago. So they've known about the way to do this for a year, sat on it, and then we kept building it anyway. So yeah, that doesn't answer your question about that. In other words, it's just laying some foundation there. But as far as their reaction, well, some people were very interested. They thought it was cool, and those people are some of those people are running their own public key domains and like showing how they they can look up their key using HTTPS, these kind of things. Um, and then some people were obviously very antagonistic or defensive, I guess would be a better word. Just basically trying to very loosely associatively assess the situation and discredit me, discredit PubKey, just very ignorant kind of like criticisms that weren't even accurate. We had that kind of thing. People being very defensive and emotional about it. Like a lot of people come into the conversation thinking I have to refute PubKey, I have to deny PubKey, and okay, fine, like I understand that's natural, but like at some point you have to actually be able to like step out of yourself and look at the situation and ask what is the objective or most objective way to look at it that you can. And I think that it's hard to deny that there are improvements in PubKey. Like there are definitely improvements compared to other systems, but some of those things could be adopted by those systems. So whether or not we need to make a separate system would
the PubKey.
Well, you will find several conversations on Nostr of people ultimately saying, I could see how PubKey could be something like Nostr Next, which is just a software term for like the next version before it's ready. And now they will never do that though, because one other phenomenon that has happened as a response to PubKey in the Nostr world is none of the elders want to talk about it. Like we're getting all the like the sub people, like the B and C listers, I guess you could say. I don't mean to insult them in that way, but obviously not the most famous or most influential people in Nostr are not commenting about PubKey or commenting on it very infrequently and only when they are forced to. And so obviously there was a little bit.
Is that like Odell and Will Kasarin?
Odell has not. Will has been very extremely superficial with his replies. Like just obviously you can tell he's putting no thought into them and being very, very short.
But they know who you are and they know your work in the Bitcoin space, right? So it's not like it's coming from a bad actor. You know what I mean?
Well, some people are going to try to look at it that way because, in other words, they're just trying to think. They just see it as like a shitcoin. They think, okay, how do I refute this? How do I discredit this? How do I warn people from this phenomenon? Like, it's not an actual scientific effort to like figure out what's best. It's not what's going on.
But I mean, I am a little bit put off by the tribal nature of Nostr. It does feel a bit like Nostr or die, and it's like I still use Twitter avidly. I still use Nostr avidly, but I almost feel this weird sort of guilt if I don't use Nostr for a while.
I mean, I don't, but I actually didn't use Nostr until a couple months ago at all. Like, I mean, I looked at it sometimes and people would send me links, but I was just, I never needed it. I like Twitter.
No, I did,
but the thing that I need is the thing that we're building. In other words, if I were going to use something else, it would be what we're building.
Okay.
And so with Nostr, I started using it just basically as research to see like, okay, how buggy are these client applications? How consistent is the user experience across applications? What features are blatantly missing? Which features are new and maybe interesting?
Which one do you use now you have an iPhone, right?
I was using Primal but then the search didn't work for like 3 days, and I was like, all right, like I'm just gonna use something else, and I couldn't find another one I liked. And then I saw somebody showed me Iris, and that actually looks pretty nice.
So it's desktop. It looks on the desktop as well.
Yeah,
the Primal one has just got a lot better. There's more updates and things, but I feel bad because Primal just feels more custodial than other ones, and it's just using.
You mean because it has a wallet, or
because it's built-in Cash App, right? Or is it Strike? The wallet within Primal is basically Strike or Strike's backend or something.
I mean, I would say most Nostr apps don't have wallets, right?
Yes, yeah.
So,
but with whichever wallet I was using 6 months ago, a year ago, because I used Damas for a while, and then before that I used what was it called?
Mutiny, or
say again?
Mutiny was the Nostr wallet, right?
Yeah, no, I never used Mutiny. It was another. I've forgotten the name of this. What's the word I'm looking for? Nostr X
client.
Yeah, I forgot. Mine. Yeah. So the client I used ages ago, I was able to have my own wallet that talked to it. I can't remember if it was Albi that talked to it or something. But now, just with Primal, you're just tapping with Strike, going back and forth to people, and it's cool and it's fun. I can just tap to send likes to people, but it's not it's non-custodial, and I know it is custodial, and the whole point is that you want this to be non-custodial. You're holding your own keys because that's the point of.
I don't think you do, by
Right.
the way. I don't think you want apps to be
non-custodial.
self-custodial. No.
You don't need. Well, I guess there's such small amounts, right, that it doesn't matter as much. But why? Because then it's just
right. In other words, I think that nano transactions will never be a thing, and they aren't a thing because the actual like real world costs to process them is higher than their value.
Okay.
And so like to send you, 10 sats, and probably a lot of tips are even smaller than that.
Yeah.
To send you 10 sats, it just costs more mental load, electricity, server wear and tear. I know these are all microscopic costs, but so is the payment. And I just think there's no need for really small payments to be trustless.
Okay. So there is a boundary for you. There is like a point in which you're like, it's okay to be a custodial.
Well, the boundary comes from experience, not from ideal. In other words, I think obviously I would like to have total control of absolutely everything that I could.
Yeah.
And have it be automated when I don't.
Okay.
Like this is an ideal, but I don't think that that's reasonable. I think that I think that now that dealing with Lightning, thinking about microtransactions, thinking about their actual value, like as you pointed out earlier, like the amount that you make from zaps compared to the amount you would make from actually a structured system is just not comparable. There's just no comparison. The idea of value for value, I mean, I supported. I'm glad that they tried to rally together to have a meme, a theme, a name to call this, and tried to make a movement out of it. I think the whole thing was forced, and the value to value narrative is not even one that is compelling to anybody except artists.
I've yet to meet a creator, whether it be an artist or filmmaker or whatever, who's actually genuinely comfortable living on value for value on Nostr or similar.
Yeah.
And I thought foolishly, and I drank Kool-Aid this time last year, and I was like, I can go independent next year, could try it with value for value, and a month and a half in, I was like, oh my god.
I don't even think that's a good heuristic either. Like, I actually think the information isn't even useful. Never mind that what you won't even actually make money off of it. I think tipping is just a non-use case. Tipping is like a little feature you throw into an app because it's fun. It's not like a use case. It's not something like zaps are pretty central to the Nostr brand.
Yeah.
I think they're inconsequential, honestly. I think they're fun. They might have gotten some people interested and may have duped some people through the value for value thing and the thing that they may make money this way, or this is how the world works in itself when it's self-sovereign, is people just tip each other.
The choice is also an issue. Like, you set your number to be whatever you want to be, and I use it as a like button, so I'll just zap any comment I see. And, when you have a lot of comments to go through, it's a lot easier to zap it, and it feels more meaningful than hitting the heart button, for example. But when it comes to actually, I've seen a nice post and I want to tip it something meaningful, the second you've then got to make a choice about it, it becomes a bit laborious, and you're like, actually, this is a bit annoying. It's like when you go to the end of a meal and you've got to work out how much you want to send them. And that UX is not amazing, right? If you want to pay for something, then bloody pay for it at the price which is stipulated. You shouldn't have to choose what amount you're paying. I mean, this isn't a problem with Zaps. This is a problem with just sort of tipping generally. And so,
I mean, I think people should be free to tip. People that want to tip should tip. People that deserve tips should get tips.
Yeah.
But I don't think anything of that should be formalized or considered a system.
Yeah.
Like it's not a solution. It's just something. It's a tip. It's extra. It's something people throw in without consideration or just because of consideration.
Yeah.
And so like when you think about, like you mentioned, you see a post you like, well, what do you think is going to help the person more? 5 sats or you actually giving like actual relevant feedback to that person? Like, yes, it costs more to you to take the time, to take the thought, to articulate the thought and be accurate with your thought. But in the end, like, and I'll use this as a segue to talk about something with PubKey, which we didn't get to. I talked about poisoned algorithms being one of the problems. In PubKey, the PubKey app that we're building, instead of zaps, instead of like buttons or upvotes, there are none of those things. There's just the ability to add any kind of tag you want to.
Okay.
And so we call this social tagging. And we use these tags actually as part of a social graph. And so instead of just having a normal social graph that's just how people are connected, it's how people are connected. And so basically, like if I tag your post, say you made that interesting post, and I tag it as Bitcoin research, right? And now if I consistently tag things, or other people consistently tag things that are Bitcoin research, now your post can be singled out when people are looking for Bitcoin research. You get feedback that I think your post classifies well as Bitcoin research.
Like when you get added to a group or a list on Twitter. Have you ever been added to someone else's list?
Yeah.
Similar thing, right?
That would be more like tagging your profile, which you can also do.
Yeah,
so you can tag a post, or you can tag a profile, and both work the same way. And so they create basically a connection between you and that person, and that connection is that word, is that tag. And so instead of having, say, 50 likes, you might get 50 heart emojis. You might get 20 the word like. you might get 30 100 emojis, or you might get fake news and buy fake news tags. You know what I mean? Like it gives everybody, it's sort of a mix between community notes and a way of taking what people would consider to be the algorithm of their feeds and them creating it together themselves. So instead of relying on us or PubKey or a centralized entity to provide your feeds and decide what's best for you, you decide what is shown to you. And so this is like you are the algorithm instead of using a poison algorithm or an algorithm of somebody else's motives. So that's another aspect of PubKey that we're trying to fix the web with, is basically there are these old ideas of like the semantic web. Maybe people want to research this. The semantic web is actually the original Web3. Before Web3 and before shitcoins even existed, there was a Web3 that was meant to be called the semantic web. And it never came. And I always thought it was interesting. And so I think that what we've done is we found a way to combine these things that I feel is pretty elegant, to be able to say, okay, if we're going to have a self-sovereign peer-to-peer based web that's key-based, how do we now find things? How do we connect? And we basically use what's called web of trust concepts within a social graph. So we say, okay, like, if I'm friends with you, how much do I care? How many distances or how much depth into the graph do I want to extend my interest? So say I'm searching for data that's tagged, Bitcoin research. I might now how deep do I want to go in the graph? Do I only want to include data of people that I follow? Do I want to include data of the people they follow? And then which tags do I want to filter by? And these kinds of things. So it basically allows you to reconstruct the algorithm in your feed yourself.
Nice.
In a somewhat active way. And so there's a passive aspect. In other words, you build it over time and your peers build it with you. So it's more of like a web of relevance would be a way to look at it.
You imagine that Nostr might pinch that idea soon, because it's another thing that
a lot of these ideas converge, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, when you start working on these problems, you start realizing you have to create these solutions. And so it's always going to look like people are copying each other in this industry, because there is an aspect of similarity to where in other words, we're all walking in this direction, but some of us are aiming there, some of us are aiming there, but we're all going that direction. You know what I mean? So we're going to end up having similarities. That said, I have noticed there is somewhat of a trend of where, because everything is competitive and tribal, when people are introduced an idea, they reject the idea, but the good ideas still stick or get into their head eventually, and they become reinvented. You know what I mean? And so it's like now you'll get like the Nostr, so-and-so has this new nip that does this new thing, and he has a new term for it, and it's new. But then when you read it and look at it, you think, oh, this is just DHT for Nostr. You know what I mean? Or this is just, this for Nostr. And I shouldn't be singling out Nostr, because all the things do this, whether it be Blue Sky, Web5, whatever else.
It's funny because, sitting here and sort of having a normal chat about Nostr and a little bit critical at times, I almost feel compelled to say, but I love Nostr and I use it regularly. And that's another part of Nostr, which is kind of weird, is that there is this toxic positivity about it all.
I'll just say I love people. Like, I'm a very critical person, but I love humanity. I love life. Like, I am much more positive than it seems. I'm just discerning. Okay. I have standards. I'm very judgmental and very critical. But I think that it's amazing that Nostr was able to bootstrap a network. I think there's so much that we can learn from observing what has happened in the past couple of years, and I value that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think Nostr solves any problems for me. To me, it's just the Bitcoin social network. Effectively, I think that's what it is for pretty much everybody.
It literally is that, or it's
other than devs. For devs, it's also a source of income because they get grants.
Yeah,
they get grants and
I got rejected. Maybe that's why I'm a bit like hung up about it. Okay. So yeah, I think we're coming to a natural conclusion. Also, Francis is probably waiting outside or something. I know that the debate in El Salvador, we were saying at the start of this conversation that, the debates were called in Lugano. The one in El Salvador should be you debating someone from the Nostr crowd about whether or not Nostr fixes this.
Maybe, but is that Bitcoin?
It doesn't matter.
I mean, I'd love to do it. Again, I'm always critical, right?
Technology, right? It's not just Bitcoin. Yeah, they talk about heat and a whole bunch of I think that could work quite well. And let's be honest, a lot of the people at these conferences are crying out for genuine, Bitcoin discourse as opposed to just another panel where we say.
No, I wouldn't mind debating the ossification thing, the thought-provoking thing, the governance. All these things are related. I think they're underrepresented. I think that I'd be happy to do debates.
Cool. Okay. Final message then. What is your final message actually to the Bitcoin community? What would you like to leave them with?
I don't know. Pump that shit.
No, we didn't hit 100K while we were recording, right?
Yeah, I'm not a pumper, but yeah, I am happy that the bull market is actually playing out. I am happy that it looks like we'll be attacking 100K this weekend, hopefully again. I do wish that there were more influx of Bitcoin users during the bull market. I see tons of people following me on Twitter every day. I think it's all bots.
Yeah.
I don't think it's real.
Okay. Well, that would imply they're Bitcoin users, right? You're not going to get, Mr. Smith buying the Bitcoin ETF to start following you on Twitter.
Well, that's what I mean. It's it just doesn't seem I don't tweet enough lately to just have a steady stream of followers. It doesn't make sense. So I think there's a lot of bots going on.
I mean, I get more followers.
But yeah, I mean more in the sense that it would be nice to see just obvious growth of Lightning and Bitcoin apps. You know what I mean? From what we see with growth with say Bitkit, for example, we have to fight for every user. This is not we're getting to capture some of the flow. This is that we have to go and take users from other apps or make them use two apps. This isn't a growing economy.
Yeah. You got at least 12 users with my video last night.
Yeah,
at least 12. Yeah, because Jacopo very cleverly did that. Did you see that? Did you see what he did? The free Bitcoin integration. Yeah. And I got people, because you can see the interactions with the video, right? So people were pausing at the 5:17 mark because it said free Bitcoin to scan the QR code, which takes some standard Bitkit, and I thought it was smart. And so and people commented saying thanks for the free Bitcoin. So it worked. So that's cool.
Nice.
Okay, in which case, are you happy to leave it there, or is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would have liked me to ask or discuss? Or
no, I guess I'll just leave and say that if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm Bitcoin Error Log, as we discussed. Same on Telegram if you want to chat.
And Nostr.
On Nostr I'm a key, but you could search for Bitcoin Error Log. I don't know if you'll get the right one.
Maybe you should just redefine it as Nostr Error Log.
I have an Nostr Error Log.
Especially, of course you do.
On my phone, I'm Nostr Error Log. On my desktop, I'm Bitcoin Error Log. And then for the company Synonym, synonym.to for the website, and then pubkey.org, that's PUBKY, if you want to learn about the code in PubKey Core, and then pubkey.app if you want to get a preview of what we're trying to build with the app. It will come out early next year.
Any pushback from PubKey New York?
Oh, I'm sorry, Bitkit. Bitkit.to as well if you want to try the Bitkit app. No, I actually know Thomas Paccia, the guy who I think owns that.
Yeah.
We're both big crypto economics Eric Voskuil fans.
Oh yeah.
So we've talked about that in the past.
I hate you just brought that up because I still haven't read it.
I don't think it's I tell everybody that you should read it.
Yeah,
it's not actually readable. It's not actually readable.
Oh really? Okay.
No. I'm not trying to troll people. In other words, it's not a very well written book. It's just very great information.
Okay.
But it's presented in this kind of every chapter is a different fallacy or point. So it's more like a collection of essays or something. And there isn't necessarily a very clear sequence to these essays. So it's kind of just it's a great bathroom book. And just put it beside the toilet, read a chapter, see if, feel stupid, and then start your day.
Okay, right.
But yeah, no pushback from him. He just sent me a message with a smiley face and didn't say anything else. And
Oh, great.
I don't want to trigger any sort of legal consequences, so I just smiley faced back. All right.
Good to know. Yeah, okay. In which case,
It was how. Yeah, I think we can coexist. Thank you for your time.
no, thank you, mate. Cool. That was the wonderful John Carvalho in Lisbon. To keep up with his work on Twitter, check at Bitcoin Error Log or at Synonym_TO. I would also like to thank Plan B Network, a wonderful Bitcoin-only resource where you can learn about Bitcoin for free. They are also one of my sponsors. My other sponsor is Coin Corner, which is a British Bitcoin exchange. They are run by fantastic people with a frankly wonderful product, and they've been on the scene since 2014, so you know they're good. Please check out Coin Corner as well. I have been Joe Nakamoto, and if you hit subscribe, I will bring you some more Bitcoin content very soon. Thank you so much.